What is going on, guys? Gaston right here, and in today's video we're going to talk about the Sony A7Siii III because I've been shooting with this camera for more than 2 months, and I think that I'm pretty comfortable to give you guys an opinion of what this camera is capable, especially if you're on the market of one of these. All that information coming right up. Welcome back to the channel, guys, and before we jump into this video, let me remind you about the brand new Sony A7Siii that I'm giving away right here in the channel for Christmas. All you have to do is simply go right now and subscribe to this channel, make sure to enable notifications, and you must follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Gaston Shutters. I'll be making the announcement on Christmas, so good luck to all of you guys. And by the way, this one is a worldwide contest or giveaway. All right, so let's talk about this baby that I have in my hand, because this is kind of like the first camera where I shot 10-bit nonstop. Now, the other camera that I used before to shoot 10-bit was the GH5, but I don't have a lot of lenses for that Panasonic camera, and it actually sits, in my other room upstairs where I used to film the videos before. So this is actually my very first experience grading 10-bit footage. And the reason why I decided to go with this camera is because I've been shooting 8-bit for the longest, and I'm actually pleased with the quality that I get from videos like this one and doing videos for customers, social media teaser and all that stuff. But as I get more involved with video grading, I realize that 8-bit, sometimes, doesn't allow you to stretch the color to the point that you're happy, especially if you overexpose too much or you underexpose too much and you try to recover, you're going to find the limitations right there. Now, with this camera, you are going to find yourself, being able to grade images kind of like if you put a raw file in Lightroom and you can manipulate it from left to right. And by the way, this camera doesn't shoot RAW internally. It does it via HDMI. So I haven't actually shot in RAW, but I've been shooting with this camera in Slog 3 422 10-bit. And in my opinion, the level of flexibility that you get shooting Slog 3 and 10-bit, I don't think I'm ever going to need RAW, at least until I tried it. But let me talk about Slog 3 because Slog 3 has been actually part of my frustrations in camera like the Sony A7 III or A6600. Slog 3 is supposed to be the picture profile with the utmost dynamic range. And remember, these cameras have up to 15 stops of dynamic range, where Intel's usable around 13.5 stops of dynamic range, 14, which is, it's pretty much a lot for this type of cameras. So you're going to realize that you're going to have more latitude. You actually, if you look at your scopes, you're going to see that your waveform can actually take a beating. You can stretch those colors, those highlights, those shadows, the blacks, the whites, and something that you cannot do with 8-bit footage. So now the problem you're going to run into when shooting in 10-bit is that it's going to be really hard to go back to 8-bit because the latitude that you're gonna get shooting in 10-bit. So with this camera, Slog 3 in 10-bit is going to be completely different that from Slog 3 in 8-bit. And I strongly suggest that you completely remove that out of your head, because I was really afraid when I came here and dialed the camera to shoot in Slog 3, thinking that I was gonna struggle like I struggle with 8-bit. Now let me tell you the settings that I use for Slog 3. Number one, I'm gonna set up my gamma to Slog 3, and then my color mode is going to be sgamma3.cine. Now, one of the parameters that I change is the saturation, and I bumped it to +10, +5, or +15, depending on the situation. And the reason why I do this is because I find that when I do that, I actually allow more color to be recorded in my Slog 3 footage. Therefore, I don't feel that I have to push my saturation, for example, or contrast that much. I feel that I get, number one, less artifacts, and the colors look a little bit more natural when recovering, all that contrast. So this is something for you to experiment. I know that a lot of people are going to prefer to shoot as flat as possible, but I find that bumping the saturation really helps me with the color grading process. Now, let's talk about the ergonomics of this camera, because this camera is going to be, if you're familiar with the A9 or the A7 III, it's going to be a little bit more ergonomic because the grip now is a little bit deeper. Now, this is going to be very important if you have, bigger hands, and I feel that the Sony A7 III kind of like doesn't feel my fist very much, and this one, feels really, really comfortable. Now, when it comes to the dials, it's pretty much the same as the Sony A7 III. You do have larger buttons and more tactile dials. And the new thing that we have right here is that dedicated move and record button that when you're shooting stills is really, really handy to swap to video mode, which is simply pressing that button. Now, let's talk about stills, because this camera is ruled as a video camera only. But 12 megapixel, which is the maximum resolution that you're going to get from this camera, allows you to get images with the utmost dynamic range out of all the Sony cameras, in my opinion. And I actually have done a professional photo shoot at 12 megapixel, and I was super happy with the outcome. So with 12 megapixel, if you're not going to be shooting things, way too far and trying to blow them up, you are going to get enough resolution, great to post them in social media and even print. So don't think that 12 megapixel is going to be, pretty much impossible, because you're going to find that in most situations, you're not going to need more than that. Now let's talk about the ports, because that's another thing that I really like. One of the things that I don't like about all the other Sony cameras is how much these little doors dangle, and I end up ripping them off out of all my cameras. Now this camera also is going to feature a full-size HDMI, and in my opinion, that's the way to go when you're talking about a camera for video. Now I snapped my HDMI port in my Sony A7 III, so I'm actually really happy that the Sony A7 III has a full-size HDMI. I wish that you can actually remove these doors, and probably there is a way that you can do that. But one problem that I found is if you're going to be rigging this camera with a small rig cage and you want to connect the grip on this side, the way that the cage actually lays out, it doesn't allow for this door to open and connect the grip at the same time. So small rig, if you're watching this video, do something about it, because that'll be nice to actually be able to put a grip without actually removing these doors. And I think one of the highlights for this camera is going to be the flip out screen and the brand new menus with touchscreen capabilities. You're not going to realize how important it is, the screen, until you start using the screen and realizing that you can control the entire camera by simply tapping on the screen without having to go all the way around to your camera to adjust settings or parameters. And especially if you're going to be using this camera for YouTube videos or, vlogging with it, it's going to be very, very handy. So I'm actually planning to get another one just to leave it fixed at the studio for my sit-down table where I do all the product reviews. So now, one of the main problems that I always had with Slog 3 was, once again, the amount of artifact that I get when I film with 8-bit cameras 420 like the Sony A7 III. So one thing that I'm going to recommend is that leave that fear, as something from the past, because with the Sony A7 III, grading Slog 3 is just a breeze, guys. So don't be afraid to actually set the picture profile to Slog 3 and go at it. Now, how I expose my Slog 3, is by overexposing my footage. But I actually found out that sometimes you can overexpose it too much, that you actually damage your footage. So just to give you, a pattern of how I overexpose is between plus 1.3, plus 1.7, plus 2. And a lot of the times I find myself to even exposing even less than 1.3, like 0.7. And this is going to happen if I am in a low dynamic range situation, meaning kind of like getting closer to night. I don't like to push my exposure too much. I realize that I get way too much noise when I try to over push my exposure plus 2, for example. So something that you're going to have to do and test yourself, because there is not an exposure algorithm that's going to work for all situations. So one of the things that I did when I first got the camera is I try to overexpose my footage in different exposures. So I started with 0, 0.3, 0.7, 1.3, 1.7, 2.0, and further beyond. And this is going to help you guys an exercise to really determine and teach you what this camera should be dialed in, in the different situations. Now let's talk a little bit about the price of this camera, because this camera goes right now for about $3,500. And in my opinion, it's kind of like the cheapest cinema camera that you can get today with the utmost amount of feature, guys. So yes, I consider this camera a cinema camera because it kind of like packs all the features that you may find in a cinema camera, and the resolution and all the bells and whistles. Now compare this camera with the Sony A7Siii I, which is a camera that was just announced, and I actually pulled the trigger because of this camera. You're going to realize that a lot of the same features of the A7Siii I are features from the Sony A7 III, including the sensor. So guys, this is going to be for today. If you are planning to get this camera, I tell you, go right ahead. You are going to have a great time and fun time grading footage with this camera. If you are on the fence between the Canon EOS R5 and this camera for video, by far go with the Sony A7 III unless you really need that 8K. I have both cameras and I use only the Canon R5 for stills, and this camera is my go-to video camera for video. So I hope you had enjoyed this video. Make sure to drop your comments down below with any further questions you may have. And until then, guys, see you on the next one.